Okay. Well, why don't we get going? So, thanks again so much for joining us, for spending your Monday evening here. I hope it is a beautiful, safe, dry space where you're at this evening. I know we're going to have a wonderful conversation. My name is Simmons Bunton. I am the editor in chief of terrain.org. And I want to let you know I'm coming to you from Tucson, Arizona, where I respectfully acknowledge my presence on the traditional and ancestral lands of the O'odham and Pascua Yaqui. I want to thank the Grace A. Tanner Center for Human Values at Southern Utah University for sponsoring the reading this evening. And of course, I want to thank our readers, Pam Houston, English Brooks, and Ramona Emerson, for joining us. I want to thank our wonderful hostess, Danielle Debraski, who's going to introduce the readers this evening. And then I want to thank everybody here in the audience tonight. This is going to be another stellar terrain.org reading. And while I'm as sad as anybody for the pandemic, I must say it's been pretty great to bring things like this for us as an organization, as a community together. So thank you for that. If your connection becomes slow, you may want to turn off your video, or you're welcome to do that anyway. In all cases, as I mentioned earlier, please remain muted, but you're welcome to post your questions and other positive feedback in chat, and then we'll open it up to audio questions after the reading too, I'm sure. We're recording this and all readings, and we'll make those available from the terrain.org website and our YouTube channel after the reading. Sometimes a week or 10 days it takes me to get those up. And as a reminder, our series is held on the fourth Monday of just about every month. And I say just about now because we're not doing one in December, and then we're going to evaluate next year the right pace for us. But I will say that on November 22nd, we will host readings and Q&A by poets Karen Anhui Lee, Kevin Gooden, and Kimberly Berwick. So that should be a wonderful, I guess, Cascadia poetry reading, if I remember correctly. Links to register for the reading will be found on terrain.org and our Facebook page once those are generated, so look for those soon. I will also be posting book links in the chat in support of our readers this evening from their books. And also links to their contributions on terrain.org. And if you missed those or want to find other books by tonight's readers or other terrain.org contributors, hop on over to our bookshop page at bookshop.org/terrain.org, or find the link under About in the terrain.org website navigation menu. So now, a few obligatory words about terrain.org. We are the world's first online environmental journal, publishing since 1998. Which also makes us the second longest publishing online literary journal, right behind Brevity, this according to Andrew Monson, who has the third longest, which is Diagram. We are an all-volunteer organization that doesn't charge to access our content, nor charge to submit with the exception of our contest, nor contain advertising. Indeed, we are run by the power of goodwill and dedicated weekends and evenings. And we are run by donations from good folks like you, who are welcome to donate online at terrain.org/donate. So, thank you for your support and for being part of the terrain.org community. Okay, now let's turn to the reading, followed by, again, Q&A. So please post your questions in the chat area if you have any. Otherwise, we'll open it up at the end for questions then as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's host, Danielle Debraski. Danielle Debraski directs the Grace A. Tanner Center for Human Values and is a professor of creative writing at Southern Utah University, where she also directs the Eco Poetry and Essay Conference. Her book of poems, Drift Migration, is forthcoming in December from Ashland Poetry Press. Yay! She is the co-editor of the new Blossom as the Cliff Rose, Mormon Legacies, and The Beckoning Wild, just published by the amazing Torrey House Press. There's more, just letting somebody in. And her poems have appeared in Chiron, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, Chiron Review, South Dakota Review, Ninth Letter, Pilgrimage, Salt Front, Sugar House Review, Cave Wall, Open, Journal of Arts and Letters, Under a Warm Green Linden, and terrain.org. Her chapbook Ruin and Light won the 2014 Anabiosis Press Chapbook Competition, and her poems were also published in a limited edition beautiful art book titled Invisible Shores by Red Butte Press of the University of Utah. She has been nominated 3 times for Pushcart Prize and twice for Best New Poets, and she is a 3-time winner of the Utah Original Writing Competition for Poetry. Danielle received her PhD in creative writing from the University of Utah and an MA in English/creative writing from Stanford University. Danielle, thanks so much for your support and for moderating tonight's wonderful reading. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Simmons. It's my pleasure, my honor to be able to host tonight's reading. And again, I welcome you from the Grace A. Tanner Center for Human Values here at Southern Utah University. So I am just going to go ahead and start with by introducing our first reader. And we will start with Ramona Emerson. So I'm just going to read this wonderful bio of her. Ramona Emerson is a Dene writer and filmmaker originally from Tehachapi, New Mexico. She received her degree in media arts in 1997 from the University of New Mexico and her MFA in creative writing and fiction in 2015 from the Institute of American Indian Arts. She has worked as a professional videographer, writer, and editor for over 20 years and is currently working on her 8th film project, Crossing the Line. She is an Emmy nominee, a Sundance Native Lab Fellow, a Time Warner Storyteller Fellow, a Tribeca All Access Grantee, and a WGBH Producer Fellow. In 2020, Ramona was appointed to the Governor's Council on Film and Media Industries for the state of New Mexico. Ramona just finished her first novel, Shutter, the first of a trilogy, which will be published with Soho Books in 2022, as well as adapting the series into a screenplay. Through her storytelling, Emerson looks at contemporary stories about her people and aims to question and redefine the expectations of Native cultural identity, highlighting stories that are not part of mainstream media. She currently resides in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she and her husband/producer, Kelly Byers, run their production company, Real Indian Pictures. And I had the pleasure also of watching the documentary, The Mayors of Shiprock by Ramona Emerson. And so again, looking forward to hearing her read. So please welcome Ramona Emerson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here to read. And thank you so much for being here this evening. Coming to you live from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I kind of thought it was hard to decide what to read. I haven't had to do a reading since I was in my MFA program, so it kind of freaked me out. But I did decide that I was going to read you one of my short stories, and it's called Uncle Coyote, loosely based on a real person. Okay, so I guess I will get started. Uncle Coyote. Uncle Kai was a Satanist. As a young girl, I was deathly afraid of the man. His heavy silver ring had 2 tarnished pentagrams and a ram's head, coiled horns wrapped to the side. He always wore black, always. Black boots, black hair, black eyes behind black sunglasses. He was a Coyote Indian from the hills of Saboba, California. I could see this in his face and in the way he held himself, somewhere between peace and rage, a cinder in his middle. My mother was Navajo, a volatile firecracker hidden behind round horn-rimmed glasses, tight lips, and cups of hot tea. They were a formidable but unlikely pair. Uncle Kai wasn't really my uncle, not by blood. Instead, he and my mother were schoolmates. Boarding school made bonds far stronger than familial ties, far more resilient than the thin layers of blood and flesh that connect us to our own families. In a lot of ways, they became their own family, keeping in touch no matter what the circumstance, sharing friends, sharing loss, and clinging to what was left of their old selves. They had known each other since they were teenagers, both far away from home and without direction. They were both artists, painters. They would clink their glasses together in the studio with its sweet mixture of paint, turpentine, and aged scotch. The two of them would laugh, smoke, and work together. Their paintings and drawings would come one by one as they argued drunkenly into the night, talking color and substance, money and circumstance. In the mornings as I left for school, they would still be in the studio. The world outside the studio doors didn't exist when they were together, when they were together with each other and with their art. They were both crazy, reckless, and untamable. I was nothing like them. When I was 16, I was awkward and quiet like many before me, but I was an introvert in the worst of ways, trapped by a life I was forced to live. I worried about rent and bills, tests in the future. We were poor, and this fact bore heavy on me. An artist's wage never kept us in one place for very long, and when the bills came, My mother would head to her studio and hide behind the closed doors. I began to hide in the shadows myself, somewhere far away from all the pretentious strangers at my Catholic school. There were halls lined with the motherly lick of rich kids' money. I was the equalizer, the brown face they pulled from class on diversity day, and the face they put on their flyer to help them meet their quotas. That was me, and I knew it, and I was nothing more. At the end of the otherwise lackluster year, Uncle Kai pulled into our driveway in a black limousine minutes before sundown. I hadn't seen Uncle Kai in a long, long time, but my mother went out and embraced him. You need to lend me your kid, he said. Take her, my mom replied. There wasn't even hesitation in her voice. The leather seats of the limo squeaked as I moved inside. I prepared for my last day on Earth. Still wearing that horned silver ring, old Uncle Kai sat at the far end of the limousine. His blackness infused the shadow. Only his face came into the light as the limo pulled out into the busy streets. I imagined my fate, tied down to some satanic altar in the desert, watching my blood drip. This cemented what I already knew of my mother's poor decisions. The devil showed up and asked for me, and she packed my bags. He reached under the seat and handed me an M16. Now, I had heard rumors about Uncle Kai, about his religious affiliations with the Church of Satan, about his gun running, his run-ins with anyone who bothered to ask questions. But most of these rumors came from Kai himself. He loved to tell stories, and that's what I always figured they were, stories. Drunken truth from a drunken man. But here was the proof. I laid the heavy steel on my lap when I heard a high-pitched jingle coming from the darkness. A box of bullets floated toward me. I caught the clanging box. Loaded up. He lit a smoke. The red ash burned in the dark. Kai, I don't know how to load a gun. That's when I really saw him. He moved toward me, his face lit up by the skylights, and sat to my left. He looked older than I remembered, his long hair speckled with white and gray strands, his eyebrows arched high above the top rim of his glasses. His face was weathered and old, his fingernails filled with black paint, dusty charcoal filling every crack. He pulled a long curved clip from the gun and began to load the gold cylinders out one by one, clicking them into place. Like this, he said. He pushed in a couple more and handed the clip to me. I did what I was told, filling the hollow chamber until it was heavy in my hand. He handed me the M16 and again pointed to the empty space that called out to it. I pushed the clip in until I heard it lock and sat there, the weight of it pressing into my leg. He looked at me with a smile, a sense of pride in teaching me something much more important than riding a bike. It's your job tonight to make sure I don't get into any trouble, understand? I'm already in trouble, so that's the last thing I need. He had another gun on his leg, the silver barrel peeking out from the tattered hem of his pants. I sat in silence, trying to keep my finger away from the trigger. The limo pulled to left hard. We both leaned into the turn, and I looked out the window to see that we had taken a turn into a potholed alley in between the garbage-lined back alleys of the student ghetto. The square portal of the driver opened up like a beacon, and Uncle Kai met the driver's hand with a huge roll of money. He pulled a black flask from his coat pocket and took a long pull. You don't approve? I looked away, unaware that I had been staring. I knew when men exchanged secret money, nothing good can come from it. There are things in this life that help me find my passion. Not all of them are legal. What can I say? I'm true to myself, he said. I grew angry thinking about how many months of bills and rent we could have paid with that huge roll of money that he just pushed out the window. I looked around the shiny marbleized interior of the limo, the crystal canisters full of expensive liquor. Uncle Kai sat in the corner puffing on his stinky cigarette. All of it made me sick. There was a knock at the window, followed by the mystery hands pushing a giant cellophane bag in through it. The window closed. I knew what it was. That's the thing about growing up in a house full of art and artists. It wasn't out of the ordinary to find artists passed out in the front yard in the mornings before school. Sometimes they were loud and drunk, singing old songs and passing around joints. Sometimes they were hideous monsters getting ready for the next show at the last minute, drawing in long white lines on mirrors before they moved to the canvases. Painters, printmakers, glass blowers, sculptors, writers, and musicians had all made their way into our ever-changing space and made their marks. I had watched many of them come into the house, some talented, some not, some just figuring out their place in this world, and I had watched them all become the old people they ran from in their youth. Uncle Kai had brought an 8-ball of cocaine. This didn't surprise me. He snorted, coughed, and wailed in the darkness, finally scraping the last bit of powder from his mirror and rubbing it on his teeth. The rest of the night was spent on the edge of incarceration. When we stopped to eat, Uncle Kai let me leave the machine gun in the car. The restaurant was a fancy place, judging by the frightened glare of the maitre d', and although we were not dressed for the occasion, they let us in, hiding us in the back, close to the kitchen. Uncle Kai grabbed the man by the arm and pulled him closer. I watched his throat jump up and down as he swallowed, white as a ghost. Uncle Kai led the man to the nicest table in the place, on the slight level above with a great view of the passers-by. I could tell that nervous white man was terrified as Uncle Kai pushed a rolled up $100 bill into his pocket and sent him on his way. I had a steak sandwich with wide, hot sliced potatoes. Uncle Kai had a huge martini and drew naked women on the linen napkins. I waited for the police to arrive, but they never did. We made our way downtown to some art openings. Uncle Kai insisted on attending. As we walked into the first gallery, we were immersed in black light. Strange women worming around painted in fluorescence. Uncle Kai enjoyed it immediately. The women were strangely drawn to Kai, their phosphorescent bodies rubbing against him. He held two on each arm, and within 5 minutes, they were at the back of the gallery feeding him grapes and chopping up lines. Even as old and disgusting as Uncle Kai was, the women could never get enough of him. He was a hidden marvel of science. After the women slithered off back to the party, Uncle Kai was ready to move on. Uncle Kai, why do these women always throw themselves at you? I had to inquire. He was short, had a big beak of a nose, and dark, deep-set eyes. His eyebrows were long and curled at the edges. Nothing about him spoke heartthrob. It's not me they're after, he said. It's what I have. The sooner you begin to accept that about mankind, the better off you'll be, especially if you intend on being an artist. He was right. I stopped and watched him as he staggered off toward the exit. A couple of doormen trying to steady his gait. I moved in to help. I'm fine, he screamed, straightened out his coat and tails, pulling the collar of his tattered black t-shirt. He staggered into the darkness and made his way to an old jazz bar on the far end of the street. The bar was in the basement, its entrance a long darkened red portal into the ground. Uncle Kai staggered below, pushing against the concrete on each side until he made his way into the door. I tried to follow, but I was stopped. ID, please. I looked into the distance as Kai continued on. Kai, Kai! He kept moving. Propelled by the invisible alcohol cocaine creature that pushed him on, there was nothing I could do. So I walked back to the place we left the limo, the driver still obscured in darkness, and got in the car. I opened the portal to an old withered Mexican man dressed in a black suit and a straw hat. Smoke rose from his lit cigarette, 2 centimeters from his newspaper page. He's at the jazz bar. My eyes stung with sweat. Let's pull around and wait for him. I could hear the commotion before we made it all the way back to the entrance. The echoes of broken glass and splitting wood emanated from the basement below. I grabbed the M16 and ran down the tunnel. There, next to the stage, 3 men held my Uncle Kai locked beneath their arms, while another man pummeled my uncle over and over from gut to face. I rose the gun into the air, held on with both hands, and squeezed the trigger. I filled the ceiling with holes before I was able to stop squeezing. My shoulder burned from the recoil, a bruise soon to rise. When the dust cleared, everyone stared at me, their eyes and mouths aghast at the little girl with the machine gun. The drywall dusted everyone like dirty powdered donuts. A huge roar of laughter came from Uncle Kai. He slapped his knee, unable to breathe. I walked to the back of the bar and took hold of Uncle Kai, guiding him up the red tunnel and into the waiting car. He laughed hysterically the entire time. He squealed out of sight as sirens approached in the distance. There's no sin bigger in this world than being stupid. That's what he always said. I have faith that you're far from that. He rubbed his hands, the black leather gloves brushing together. So thank you for saving me back there. I stared into the distance, the plaster sucking the moisture from my skin. My ears were still ringing, making his words echo behind my eyes. I was tired. Don't let others guide you into a belief that you don't understand yourself. Just be you. Be what no one expects, and don't take shit from anyone. With that, the lecture was over and Uncle Kai fell into a deep sleep, his chin touching his chest, his sunglasses still in place. I rode to the silence of the late night streetlights, flooding our windows with orange, the constant drum of Broadway patchwork. I watched the old man breathe and realized he was a mystery. I would never understand him or the way he worked. But he did speak profound truth just when you had dismissed him as nothing more than an old Indian, destined to spiral into nothing. In fact, he spiraled in whatever direction he saw fit. That was inspiring. In the old Kahia way, there was a story about Isili, the Kahia version of Coyote, who lived a life without direction and without conscience. He was described as socially reprehensible and without morals, wishing nothing more than to bring trouble to those who dared to run alongside of him. In the Navajo way, Coyote was quite the trickster and manipulator. My grandmother used to force us to drive miles out of our way through back roads and goat trails when a coyote even crossed our path on the reservation freeways. I wonder what she would say about riding in a limousine with the trickster himself. When we pulled up in front of my house, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and my mother came to help me bring him into the house. He was unconscious, unable to bring one foot in front of the other. We struggled through the doorway and plopped him on the couch. He curled up like a baby, his boots still on. I awoke the next morning and Uncle Kai was gone. A beam of sunlight from the open curtain shone down on the little couch, the cushion still holding his silhouette. I grabbed the cushion and shook it out and moved to the window to flood the room with light. I hoped to rid the room of any darkness that he had left behind. I returned to the sterile hallways of Catholic school the next day, and my world had become significantly smaller. The sheltered, unexplored lives of these golden rich children were immensely sad and insignificant. They had no idea what waited for them out in the world, but I knew. And I found myself well equipped to handle the world outside of these walls of privilege and false gods. Over the years, Uncle Kai would come into our lives for a few days and leave again. His time spent out in the world was filled with his desires, whatever he wanted, no matter what the cost. He did his time behind prison bars, spent months in rehab after getting shot on several different occasions. Uncle Kai truly intended to use up any extra lives he might have. But he lived his life, loved whoever would have him, took any drug or drink that was in his grasp, and painted until he could no longer hold a brush. I always imagined my Uncle Kai would die an extravagant death, off to fight a battle with some rebels in a foreign land, blown to bits during a bank robbery, being thrown from a train by gypsies. But death took my Uncle Kai by taking his tooth. After hijinks at a border strip joint, he finally talked one of his buddies into pulling his tooth out. The tooth had plagued him for years, and after a bottle of scotch, he felt no pain. They used an old pair of pliers from his toolbox and continued to drink through the night. He woke up the next morning in the Arizona desert, missing his tooth, the empty hole full of infection. It only took 2 days for the infection to travel the highways of his brain, eventually stopping cold a white-hot life of sin. That summer after he died, we finally got rid of that old small couch too. We stared at it in silence as the trash guys pulled away. Right now, Kai was arguing his case, the rotten tooth in his black leather hands. He could never be cheated by such a technicality. Uncle Kai would never surrender to death. Now he hides away in the bold and chunky lines of red ink on his canvases, his black eyes staring back through his paintings, the wolves on cloth, the wildness of movement. The mechanics of death were only a cog, and Uncle Kai knew that he turned the coils. Even so, Kai's ghost came to see Mom once or twice, dressed as a black angel, sitting in the corner of our kitchen and crying, rubbing his hands together in penance. The Kahia have a story about Chichaitai, the fly, who listened to the Kahia debate about the mechanics of death. The Creator had given them a choice: to live forever, to die, but then come back, or the final choice, total death with no chance of return. They talked and talked for many days, and eventually Chichaitai was tired of their constant debate. When the Kahia brought in Chichaitai to help them with their decision, the fly told them to die with no chance to return. He simply didn't want to hear them any longer. And that is what the Kahia did. They chose death. And the fly felt an ache in his heart for telling the people to make that decision, to end their wonderful lives for the permanency of eternity. So for the rest of his life, Chichaitai rubbed his little black hands together to pray for forgiveness, apologizing with every click of his rough black skin. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. I can't wait to hear the other readers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful reading. Thank you. Again, just a reminder that questions, and you can put those in the chat. And after we hear from our readers, we will have time for some questions. So our next reader is English Brooks. And this is a little bit about his work. English Brooks' scholarly and creative work has appeared in Atslan, Green Letters, Isle, Melis, Saltfront, Sunstone, Pacific Coast Philology, Western American Literature, and in several edited collections. In the summer, he directs Birch Creek Service Ranch, where teens come to the high desert to live in yurts, work local farms, hike slot canyons, play music, chase jackrabbits, eat grasshoppers, and howl at the moon. For the rest of the year, he is an associate professor of English at Snow College in central Utah. As he has become accustomed to reassuring bewildered and suspicious students, yes, English is his real middle name. Along with her maiden name, English was also inherited from his mother's side, tendencies towards squinting at birds and organizing poorly attended high altitude marathons. He's humbled by and glad for the opportunity this evening to read with these accomplished writers. And I just wanted to say that it's wonderful to welcome a fellow Utah writer to this reading as well. So thank you, English, and please welcome English Brooks.
Thanks so much, Danielle and Simmons, for all your work in organizing this, and Ramona for that wonderful reading, for sharing that story with us. I've got, these are mostly short stories, so I'll see how many we can get to. And the first one I'll start with is called Basque Countries. Jesus and Santiago had come to America to work in the mountains herding sheep, and maybe to stay. Cousins somehow, the one 19, the other 20. They had grown up together under Franco, forced to learn Spanish in school. Now their English came slowly. It was a Friday that Santiago had taken his horse down the canyon to bring back groceries: rice, cheese, bread, beers, and apples. Also a case of tuna. A day trip. That evening, Jesus sat in the doorway of their trailer, facing east across the forest below. Back in his own woods, there had been beech, sycamore, fir, and black pine, the Guernica oak, but no quaking aspen, nothing even close, shimmering like the surface of a pool troubled by an unseen hand at certain seasons, or like a mirage in the memory after returning home from someplace. He watched the cloudscape over the basin and range roll and fall, climb and reach, flush to a sharp pink, then orange, before finally releasing to darkness. It must have been another hour before the other returned. A few days later, a trapper passed through, and they talked a while, the three of them. Practice. He asked them if they had cats. No, just the dogs. Oh, he paused. Then why all these cat food cans? That's the end of that one. Okay, this one is called Utopatsli, and it was in Terrain earlier this year. It's a short story, actually Utopatsli 2149, so that's a year. It won't do, she said. That water they bring on trucks, not for the melons. She pointed her jaw towards the mounds in the dirt patch, blind, deaf, mute, and dry, then lifted her mask to spit in the gray dust. 10,000 people on this square mile of earth, patrolled by stars and armed guards. No, this place was not home. Still, she shot her eyes toward the 5-gallon bucket, and Norito knew it would be his now, to go out and carry from the antelope springs. This was the evening, in the cool and cricket song, when they pried up the fence, under the barbed wire, scraped Norito and his bucket through the deep grass. Little jackrabbit, away he bounded, between patches of moonlight, through the creosote, and from cover to shadow of greasewood he went. She was not surprised to see that he knew the way, but it did please her, this child sneaking off always, and with his stories, each of them bullshit, fantastic prayers for her to ask no further about where he'd gone or what he'd seen, played at, or collected there, on alkali flats or in the Drum Mountains. Knuckle bones, marbles, spent brass, slag glass, trilobites, fossils, shells of all kinds, and once an obsidian point, things she'd found in his pockets at the laundry barracks. And so she was sure he would find the way there and that he'd come back. First, he smelled the springs. Excuse me. Soon after, he could hear it, saw the shine of it, and then he approached to taste it once and again, splashing hands and face. Norito laid down to sleep in the grass beside for a while, an hour, maybe less. Then waking, he felt under his shoulder something, a hard shape like glass, but not so, topaz. Large as his thumbnail, a thing to be cleaned and kept. He went to place it in his jeans pocket. Nope, things got lost that way, but there in his mouth, under his tongue, it would stay. Now for the bucket, its fading label, oleo manteca, gold letters against blue. Norito plunged it down, and the toad song came full stop. A deep silence, a hole punched through that night. Then he drew it up full. In the quiet, there was a drumming or thunder far off. He stopped there, listened, felt the stone hard in his mouth. Set down the bucket, a bit too full to carry yet. He knelt, let the topaz drop from his mouth into the bucket, and lowered his face to drink off the top before going back. Still kneeling, he looked, saw his stone there at the bottom, 5 gallons deep. Norito peered in, blinking, his eyelashes brushing the surface. Now holding his hands open at his ears, he blocked the moonlight out with his palms. Then something happened. A wide, dark oval there near the bottom, a glowing ring, then a gold crown, was opening toward and then into the boy's face. That's when he fell through. Norito found himself now standing, but the moon was no more. Earth instead sat over the horizon, a fat gibbous hanging. One melon, no vine. Had he seen or come to this place through the vug behind his eyes, the jewel in his head? There was another child now, walking toward him, carrying 2 canisters, yoked and hanging on the ends of a pole. Aluminio, embossed on the side of each one. She stopped and watched his eyes. Just water, she said, hefting the containers. For them, her eyebrows motioned out past Norito. The boy looked and saw nobody else. They're hidden, you won't see them now. I'm Noria, she said. Neither spoke for a while, each holding their water. At first, all he thought was to ask her the question, but how to put it. How is it that you came to such a place? Was it as we did, fleeing some tremendous crime, or rather having authored the enormity, slow as it may have seemed then? But he didn't ask, no need to. Of course, he saw answers held in her hands as well as his own. Their shadows ran parallel in the faint earthshine. A hard wind came up, lifting white dust into the air. Both put on their masks, closed their eyes. Then Norito's vision had gone, and so had Noria. Time to go home now. Anyway, that's it. You asked why melons grow here. That boy brought water. Okay. That's the end of that one. It's a shorter one called the Tangled Bank. Take another drink real quick. Excuse me. Surely there was no better place or time that could have been arranged for the Natural History Museum's traveling exhibit than at the bank and after hours. Zion's Bank in Manti, Utah, between the church and the grocery store. Spread out now over the clean desk calendars that mark out the days like the square-cut boundaries of so many dry western states. Dusty trilobites, ammonites, bones and wood turned to stone. The plastic binders labeled escrow, annuities, amortization, hard by these cases of small bodies pinned and labeled pompilid, mutilid, lamantria dispar, other nations. Afterward, they talked. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. It's just a fancy way of saying You've still got lizards in your genes, and coral, and polyps, and fish, that we all do. They thought about this on the drive home, and she remembered having seen online the child in India, born with a tail, and worshipped by pilgrims. She had clicked on the picture. Okay, that's the end of that one. I talked with Simmons and Danielle, or maybe Simmons and Danielle. I don't know the best way to do this. I shared a short 2-minute kind of video piece that we were going to see if we could do a screen share. I don't know the best way to do that and show. Is that still that still look like that'll work?
You know, I admit I blanked on that and have this set to not share the screen. So let me see what I can do about that while you read, or we can maybe share that after Pam reads and I can dig that up.
Whatever's better. I could read another short one. The video piece, I think, is just 2 minutes. Let me double check. 2 minutes and 16 seconds. I don't know how we are on time. I could read one more short one, and if it's a hassle, it's not a big deal. I thought we'd give it a shot, but do you want me to read one while we're looking at that, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. This is more of a poem, I guess. This is called Pomegranates. It might be best if I didn't pretend to know or to understand the old stories of the underworld while I talk with these small children who share with me the seeds of this season's first open pomegranate. Persephone in Hades, a young goddess out gathering, wandering, willful, bewildered. And how many seeds was it? 4, 6? But when we come to the ridge over a shaded draw, low in the foothills, mined out generations ago and heaped up in old tailings, they run down this frozen path into the underworld, as they call it, choosing to improvise the details, explaining that in the underworld, people wear underwear. Of course, there are black sticks to find, still green moss to prod, until the path disappears in the dry stones up the creek bed. And when one cold early morning, I'm caught staring into maps of other places, Yuba River, Whidbey Island, Buenaventura, they come asking to see and to know where, why. At breakfast, I open them the jeweled chambers of another one, a pagan sacrament trucked in from some distant orchard. Scattering the seeds like embers across the table, one says to the other, let's eat lots of these so we can stay here a long time. And it just occurs to me, Simmons, I can post the link in the sidebar, I suppose, if that's easy.
Yeah, and I've got it too. I apologize. Once I set from the back end this not to share, so that folks can't share screen accidentally, it doesn't allow me to undo that unless I stop the reading. So
no problem.
I just have to share the link. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay. I just posted the video. It's on Vimeo, and it's a kind of erasure or blackout poetry project with rubbings of local, and just to simplify, I'll just say like pioneer or settler monuments in local county here, and trying to experiment with blackout poetry to respond to some of those stories. So that's posted if anyone wants to have a look at that later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I am intrigued by the short because I think it's always that anyway, to hear a series of those was great. Thank you so much for that. I'm looking forward to seeing the link that you posted. So our last reader, our final reader, is Pam Houston. I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to invite Pam Houston out to our conference, but it was during COVID, so we weren't able to have this face-to-face, but Pam participated in a wonderful panel discussion about eco-poetry and the essay, and it was just, again, terrific for our students and for our presentations. So I'll go ahead and introduce Pam. Pam Houston is the author of the memoir Deep Creek, Finding Hope in the High Country, as well as two novels, Contents May Have Shifted and Sight Hound, two collections of short stories, Cowboys Are My Weakness and Waltzing the Cat, and a collection of essays, A Little More About Me, all published by W.W. Norton. Her stories have been selected for volumes of the O. Henry Awards, the Pushcart Prize, Best American Travel Writing, and Best American Short Stories of the Century, among other anthologies. She is the winner of the Western States Book Award, the Willa Award for Contemporary Fiction, the Evil Companions Literary Award, and several teaching awards. She teaches in the low-res MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, is professor of English at UC Davis, and is co-founder and creative director of the literary nonprofit Writing by Writers. So please welcome Pam Houston.
I don't know. It was messing with the little closed captioning thing and I couldn't get my cursor in there. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. Thank you, English, for that reading. I recognize Narito and I really love him as a character. Ramona, great story. Terrific story. Can't wait for the novel. And if anyone gets a chance to see The Mayors of Shiprock, Ramona's award-winning film, it is just so beautiful and really profound. I really mean that. That's not just like saying the thing you're supposed to say when you read with somebody. It's really true. I think about that film all the time. It's just one of my favorite documentaries of all. So anyway, I'm going to read a couple of things. Thanks for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed being fiction editor at Terrain this year. And I'm going to read two short things that I wrote during the pandemic. And the first one is a letter to a stranger. That was the assignment for an anthology called Letters to a Stranger. And the assignment was simply that we write to someone we had glancing interaction with, but did not really engage. Dear 20-something German woman who was helping the Icelanders bring the sheep down the North Valley above Lagerflat on the night before the Retir. To begin, I must admit I am no one you know and ask you to excuse my forwardness. I am a 57-year-old American woman who visited Iceland this September, and I happened to be at unpronounceable Icelandic name when you and the men came riding down the dirt track in the North Valley, pushing ahead of you 1,500 sheep. You had come all the way from Lagerfell Hot Springs, a distance of more than 20 kilometers, gathering sheep from the highlands along the east side of the Jukulsa River. I was on foot when you arrived, high up on the side of the hill, helping the men who, together with their sheepdogs, were pushing the sheep you were driving down along that final fence, the ones with the pens at the bottom, where they'd stay overnight, packed in like sardines and bleeding like crazy until tomorrow when you and the others would move them on down valley to the Retir. That's bleating, not bleeding. I hear my New Jersey in there saying bleeding, but it's bleating like crazy. There is no English equivalent for the word Retir because it is both the name of the wheel made from wood or stone that holds hundreds of sheep in pie slice compartments and the name of the yearly event where farmers sort the sheep into that wheel, one pie slice per farmer. Retir means sheep party, one of the men I followed up the hillside had said. As I watched you dismount, sling your saddle off your horse's back and place it on the crossbar of a fence for airing, I guessed it was your second summer in Iceland, and also that there was a young man waiting for you back in Berlin who writes computer code and will one day have a very good job. Perhaps last summer you went home on the 15th of August so the two of you could have a Croatian holiday before you returned to university. And when you told him only a few weeks ago that this year you planned to stay in Iceland until the end of September, till after the secondary retir, where you and the men will pick up all the strays, there was silence on the line for a good 60 seconds before he said he was late to have a beer with his mates. Maybe if you were being honest with yourself, you would admit that you miss your Hanoverian gelding Till, a bright bay with high withers and a floaty extended trot just made for the dressage ring, more than your code writing boyfriend. But these Icelandic horses with their stocky bodies, their get up and go, and their honest, ever expanding hearts have gotten your attention, have made you forget a little, even Till. This summer when you arrived, the farmer took you up to the wild herd and let you choose a 4-year-old gelding to train up by yourself, and you did, a flea-bitten gray with an unusually dark mane you named Naturaman, Nader for short, Icelandic for night sky. He was a good learner from the start, a horse prone to making the right decision. The trust built between you all summer long, but never more than this day of the gathering, tolting down the high sides of the valley, shoulder to shoulder with a dozen men 3 times your age on horses they halter broke before the turn of the century. Nader followed those tried and true horses over ancient lava flows, leaping downhill over glacial erratics, dodging holes with a kind of intuition you'd never seen before, holes that would have snapped Till's long legs like matchsticks. Together you were tireless, up and down the valley wall, finding the strays and loners who hid in crags and steeps or wandered up and over the top into the highlands where they would never survive the winter. Nader never shied nor stumbled, not when a particularly defiant ewe mock charged him, not even when the caribou yearling, most likely abandoned by his mother and hanging with the ewes and lambs for the summer, came galumphing down the hill beside you, insisting that wherever those sheep were going, he was going too. Don't think it hasn't occurred to you to put Nader on a boat and take him back to Berlin and straight into endurance training. But then you think about the long, hot German summer, the stall he'd be forced to stand in every day, and how even if you could find a good turnout situation, he'd never graze again along a glacial-fed river or fill his lungs with this crystal air or doze under the northern lights, his legs tucked under him like a deer. As you ate the bread and apples the farmer's wife brought out, as you took the mandatory shot of Brennivin, you kept your eyes on Nader, checking for lameness, making sure he was cooled down. Then you were up and moving toward the sheep pen, the first one over the fence, shushing them toward the chute, moving half of them to the lower pen so they would have a place to lie down tonight, enough room to turn around. Panicked lambs bleated for ewes and vice versa, and you moved with the wave of them, advancing and receding, resisting and capitulating. You knew some half of these lambs would go to slaughter, but not tonight, not tomorrow. This is how the world feeds the world, you thought. 4 solid months of bliss up in the highlands, and then everything changes. You too were changing. The air in the pen prickled with the change. Even the men who'd been so cool all day, who wouldn't answer any of your questions except in Icelandic, who were simultaneously chaffed and impressed that a girl could keep up, could hang in, could not lose her seat or her temper or her mind going up and down those steeps all day. Just you and Nader, one body, moving a lot of other bodies, food for the family, home and safe for the winter, more lambs the next spring. Even those men were tired and impatient, but not you. No, you had burnished roses in your cheeks, the pure joy that came with 20 miles of hard riding in wild and clean terrain, with a job well done in a centuries-old tradition that by some twist of fate, you'd been allowed to fully participate in this country that sits in the place where the North American tectonic plate and the European tectonic plate are pulling apart from each other at the rate of 18 centimeters per year. There you were saying shush, shush, shush to those sheep in the pen, alive in every cell and as beautiful a human being as I have ever seen. You had a star inside your chest and it was glowing like a supernova. Your heart had expanded to the size of an Icelandic horse's named after the night sky, or a spring lamb's set out to pasture with her twin sister and her mom the whole summer ahead to look forward to. I am writing you now because you may not have known how wondrous you were in that moment. My hope is that you will take that day into consideration as you make decisions about how to live your life. Sincerely, Pam Houston. And then the second one is about that same length. It was for an anthology called Alone Together, and which was to raise money for independent bookstores during the pandemic. And I was assigned the word stamina. A lamb was born here on Saturday, a little ram. And when I say little, I mean it. He was a preemie, born late in the season, conceived a month after the usual end of mating season. The last thing we need around here is another ram. We have two already. And though they are best friends, they spend most of their time with the tops of their heads grotesquely bloodied, doing to each other exactly as their name suggests. Sometimes for fun, they ram me, taking me down from behind at the knees. These are Icelandic sheep, which are, any shearer will confirm, the wildest of the domestic breeds. The rams have large circular horns, big enough to do some damage. My Icelandics have fought off coyotes, a mountain lion, and a black bear. And though some of them lost the battle, some of them, including Elsie, the mother of this little preemie, won, which is why she is alive to birth another ram, which, as I mentioned, is the last thing we need. It is the ewes who protect the herd from predators, while the rams, the ones with the great big horns, cower in the back. It is also the ewes who protect their babies from the very rams who sired them. I have seen a ram toss a newborn into the air minutes after birth. Luckily, lambs bounce. The ranchers in this valley will tell you it is only the male lambs the rams go after in order to cut down competition. But I have seen a ram lift a tiny mewling female into the air likewise, and as I was running to separate them, I have seen the ewe 5 minutes postpartum pin that ram, who weighs a third again as much as she does, to the ground. Saturday's lamb was the tiniest ever and more than a little listless, not eager to nurse. Icelandics always give birth mid-morning, so the baby has the maximum hours of warmth and daylight to get steady on his feet and well fed. Over the course of the long afternoon, I prompted the little ram to nurse successfully at least twice, but Elsie wasn't doing much to encourage him, which made me think she had already given him up for dead. There is always the thought when a ewe shows little interest that she might know more than I do, might know the lamb has some genetic defect or that one of his internal systems isn't right. I live at high altitude, so even this far into May, the temperature was forecast to dip into the low 20s. After nightfall, Elsie wasn't even trying to keep the little ram warm, and he was too out of it to seek comfort himself. I bundled up in my fleece-lined pants, my down parka and wool hat to sleep in the barn with Elsie and her baby. Why didn't I take that baby into the warm house with me? I was still hoping Elsie wouldn't reject him outright. Bottle babies are a lot of fun, but they rarely get the nutrition and antibodies they need to thrive. What you learn on a ranch is that the sweetest things die. And there are a few things in the world sweeter than the tight, tight curls of a newborn Icelandic sheep, or the warm breath that rises up and out of him, or when he licks your chin with his tiny pink tongue. A year from now, should this baby live, he will be big and strong enough to break my kneecaps. But this summer, he will bound around the pasture, chasing butterflies, baaing his sweet, high-pitched baa, and tumbling through the grass with his older girl cousins. Most of my neighbors would tell you I had already gone too far trying to save him, that I should always let nature take its course. But I am not a rancher. I am a writer, a teacher, a progressive, an activist, a woman who raises Icelandic sheep and names them. COVID has kept me home for 3 solid months and connected me more intensely than ever to my animals. Sleeping in the barn with the preemie feels like a natural extension of all that. Elsie bedded down away from the lamb. I lowered myself to the ground with my back against a haystack and pulled the baby on my lap. He snuggled into my down jacket, making little sucking sounds. Every time he wanted up, I let him, but then he would just stand there, staring at the wall and swaying. So I would scoop him back up and he'd bed down again. At first light, I got him to nurse a little, but Elsie wouldn't stand still long enough for him to get much milk. By 8 a.m., he had lost the use of his back legs and was shaking no matter how tight I held him, a sure sign he was starving to death. There is no substitute for authentic ewe's milk, but I went to the house and mixed up some Save-A-Lamb milk replacer. The baby was too weak to suck, too weak by then to care, so I force-fed him, not with a tube, just a bottle. I forced the nipple in his mouth and rubbed his throat to make him swallow and didn't let him out of my lap until 2 ounces of the milk was gone. With newborns, if you are going to see improvement with milk replacer, you usually see it quickly. I wasn't seeing much. He had stopped shaking, but his eyes were dull and he was still unwilling to stand. By that time, I'd decided if he was going to die, I could give him some comfort while he did it. I rocked him and kissed his lanolin-smelling head, his sweet little nubbins of horns. He weighed almost nothing. Elsie watched me a little coldly, I thought, from her corner of the enclosure. "What do you know that I don't know?" I asked her, but she just chewed her cud. I didn't know what was wrong with the little ram, but I did know that 100,000 Americans would be dead from COVID by the end of the weekend. I knew the real number was actually higher because several states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, had been cooking their COVID books. I knew the vast majority of the dead had died without their loved ones there beside them, and I knew tens of thousands of those deaths were unnecessary, due only to the colossal failure, perhaps intentional, of the Trump administration and its enablers in the GOP. I knew our government was being deliberately dismantled from within. I knew that by virtue of being an outspoken woman, I was no longer safe here at my beloved ranch. And I also knew that on the scale of who is and is not safe in this country, I fared infinitely better than most. I knew that it was long past time for those selfish and shameful men to relinquish control of this country into the hands of women. I knew it was time for women to step into the power they have been gaslighted out of believing was theirs all along. I knew I had some role in that perhaps we all did, and I knew I needed to figure out what it was. I spent all day Sunday in the barn and force-fed that little ram 6 more times, 2 ounces every 2 hours. He got so sick of me shoving the rubber nipple into his mouth that the 7th time he got up, bobbed and weaved over to Elsie and started nursing. I spent Sunday night in the barn too, but by then he was toddling around again and Elsie was showing a bit more interest. Mostly he slept curled against her, coming over to sniff at me once an hour or so, maybe making sure I was warm enough. By Monday morning, it seemed for the first time that the little ram might make it. Before the day was over, a Minneapolis policeman named Derek Chauvin would kneel on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killing him. When I was a girl, my father broke many things that belonged to me. My femur and my hymen, to name the 2 most significant. He crumpled 16 of his cars around my body and his own, driving drunk and careless and angry. Then there was the psychological torture. See any Trump tweet of any 72 hours, which I still insist was the worst torture of all. Surviving my father's house took hypervigilance and wiliness, the ability to separate my mind from whatever was being done to my body. Most of all, it took stamina, 17 years of it. The drumbeat always in my head saying, keep your eyes open, plan for the worst case scenario, stay alive at any cost, survive long enough to get out. By first light on Tuesday, the little ram's legs worked perfectly. I spent parts of the next 3 days and nights in the barn, and then it warmed up enough to send me back to my own bed. Now he's a week old, skipping across the outdoor enclosure, bouncing off the walls of the stall, crawling all over Elsie and ramming the holy hell out of the water trough. He weighs 4 times what he did last Saturday, and when I lift him, I feel his warm, rounded belly full. The milk replacer is closed up and put away for next year, and even now, every time he sees me, he runs straight over to Elsie to nurse. I am not any sort of hero. I saved the ram because I thought maybe I could. I saved him because none of my heartfelt writing, nor my activism, nor my passionate progressive values could save George Floyd. I saved him because cities are burning all across my country and because a man I can't keep straight anymore from my dead father promised to do this to us, and now he is doing it every day. I saved the lamb to mitigate, if slightly, the wave of grief that is raining down on us, to prove to myself that I have both the strength and the stamina to save at least one small fragile thing. I left my father's house when I was 17, did not expect to find myself back in it at 58, along with my 330 million brothers and sisters. To beat COVID, to beat these soulless goons whose endgame is always cruelty for cruelty's sake, we are going to have to play the long game, all of us together, even if the men with the big horns cower in the back. I can't run quite as fast as I used to, nor kick quite as hard. But what I haven't lost over the decades is stamina. Sleeping in the barn for a week to save a lamb whose mother left it for dead may not sound like much, but my mother left me for dead too, so often in my father's bed. And now you ought to see how I can ram a water trough. You ought to see how I still bounce. Elsie looks at me with a little more respect these days than she used to. In the wilds of Iceland, she might have had to abandon that baby. But here she has a barn full of hay and a woman just tenacious enough to believe she can save anything. Maybe some lives, maybe democracy. This morning, and only this morning, I named the little ram Tank. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. A powerful, powerful piece. Each one of them. Thank you so much for reading those. So we have questions that can come through the chat. If you'd like to submit those, I have tons of sticky notes with tons of questions as I was listening, and I'll settle on one of them if we don't have any questions that come forward in the chat. So so we can, I don't know, Simmons, if you see any questions that are coming forward, and if not, then I'll go ahead and ask one of my questions.
There was a question that came in just now for Pam, but why don't you first ask one of your questions to all of the readers?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So as I listened to each of your pieces that are from these different genres of the short story, the short, creative nonfiction, and then also going back to Ramona with the concept of the documentary, I felt like each of your pieces take a character or the self as a character into places that are unfamiliar. And then they reach a kind of, there's a sort of a core to your piece. I was also so struck by the visual images that you use. And I wondered if you could talk about that idea of using visual imagery and how you know you've reached the core of that unfamiliar place of your pieces.
I can jump in real quick since I'm unmuted. And which is just to say, one of the things I always tell my students is that, like, trust the metaphor, it knows more than you do. And I think that's what you're speaking to right there. You know, I spend a lot of my pre-writing process just collecting what I call glimmers, these shiny objects that I want to bring home and put on the page. But I usually do that not knowing what I'm going to do with them or what they mean in any real sense. And sometimes I think if I put a lot of those together, those images, those glimmering things together, you know, they will add up to more than the sum of their parts, and they will surprise me, and they will give me access to something in my interior landscape that I don't have access to without those tools to get in there, those hunks of earth, you know, and that's the mystery. Like that's the discovering of the mystery, basically, for me.
I love the idea of the glimmerings. I wondered who else, English or Ramona, how would you discuss that, the idea of visual imagery in your work, and what it helps you to discover about the piece, about the journey of that piece?
Well, I think when I started to write that story, with most stories, it comes from something that really happened, of course. And I take that and I think about visuals. Like I have photographs of my Uncle Bill, who it was based on. I look at the photographs. I talk to my mom a little bit, like just kind of have a phone call, like remember that time when Bill did this, or remember that, and like then she'll tell another story, and I'll be like, yo, yeah, I forgot about that, you know. So like I will actually talk to my mom about some stories because we had lost him, and my mom was really sad, and it was a good time to just kind of talk about him. And then comes the documentary part of me, which is, okay, what do Satanists really believe? Because my Uncle Bill really was a Satanist. Like he really belonged to the Church of Satan. Like, and I wanted to know, like, what do Satanists really believe? Because I mean, I kind of grew up Catholic. I survived Catholic school, right? But I wasn't a Catholic by any stretch of the imagination. I just kind of been put there, but I didn't really understand anything about Satanism except what I had been taught in Catholic school. So I really started to do research on Satanism, and I started to realize it's actually not that bad. You know, and I like started to talk about some of the things that they believed, and it's true. Like their biggest sin is that you could be stupid. And I'm not joking. Like I really went and did the research, and that's what the Church of Satan believes. Number one sin, don't be stupid, right? So I thought, wow, man, it's really a kind of an interesting religion. Not that I'm going to become a Satanist or anything, but it's not. I think it's more than, you know, like finding young virgins to sacrifice and chickens and goats. I mean, I think people have like a whole like movie mentality of what Satanism is versus what it really is, and people really believe. And over the last few years, like it's always the Church of Satan that'll come out on Twitter and say something that totally nails it. It's like, yes, the Church of Satan, like kind of brings it to light once again. Anyway, so I took all of those elements together, and then I wrote the story. So that's kind of my approach. I'm kind of a big researcher. I do a lot of research on maybe the topics that I'm writing on, but then I usually base almost all of the things I write about on real people, and I'll change their names and I'll change some things about them, but it's a root, like it all roots down to where it really started. And then I just add a little research and a few visuals. I think I'm really a visual thinker and speaker. So that's just kind of, as a filmmaker, I think it just kind of works that way.
Thank you.
I want to come around to the question, but I love that, Ramona. Like, we could do a lot worse than that, right? First, do no harm. Don't be stupid. Do unto others. Like, we could manage 2 out of 3 of those at least. We'd be all right. Those are excellent responses and give me a lot to think about. And I think, I guess in each case with, you know, these are like little short pieces, and that's a keen observation that I think is kind of reminding me that for me, that the sort of depicting the place or setting, you know, the descriptive work, maybe it comes easier, or I'm more interested in that sometimes than even telling the story. So I feel like the story becomes a means to depicting a place or a moment. And it's actually something I, you know, aspire to be better at is focusing on or taking more seriously the narrative part, the storytelling part. That part is harder for me. But yeah, I guess I would echo both Ramona and Pam on the point of gathering those impressions or those details and fitting them into the story. And for me, sometimes just building a story around those as a way of laying those out or drawing a thread through those beads. Yeah.
Thank you to all 3 of you. I could see when in discussing the glimmerings, going to English as your work with the trilobites, fossils, the list of things that are seen on the ground. And then Ramona, I appreciate you bringing in that notion of the visual, just seeing the visual, but also drawing on someone else's memory of that visual as well, and kind of bringing those together. So thank you. So I think if we do have some questions in the chat, we can turn our time over to those questions if there are some that are coming in.
There's a good one by Nancy Lord. Nancy, do you want to ask that? Unmute.
Oh, sure. Um, yeah, my question's for Pam, because I think Pam's reading really showed that you can write literature that is also has political substance, and we often hear that you can't combine them. So my question is, do you worry about alienating readers who might not want to hear what you have to say? And I mean, how do you deal with that?
No. like the simple answer is no. We are too late in the history of the world, as Carolyn Forche would put it. In fact, these days, it's kind of gone the other way for me. Like if I'm writing something that isn't politically engaged, I mean, we could talk semantics about writing in and of itself is political engagement. Telling one's own story is political engagement. But I would say if I'm writing something that isn't overtly politically engaged right now, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. And so that has flipped around. Of course, we look roughly the same age, back when I was in grad school, like the last thing you could have ever done was have a political opinion on the page. And so I was afraid of it. But then for the reasons stated in my essay, I couldn't, I have a little tiny voice and I have to use it to try to stop fascism and to save the planet. That sounds so grandiose, but like, what else am I doing with myself? If I'm not trying to do those two things, my life is divided between teaching, where I'm doing everything I can to illuminate voices that need to be heard. And that feels really good. But in my own work, if I'm not fighting for the planet, and if I'm not fighting for the rights of people other than cisgendered white men, I'm not doing it right now. That's how I feel.
Can we expand that question too? I'd love to hear from Ramona on that as well.
Well, go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say, well, I don't tend to put a lot of politics into the things I write, but I tend to try to kind of overtly make comments about certain things through my characters. Like my characters may talk about something that I believe in, or talk about something that I feel passionate about. But I think it's really because I don't write a lot of nonfiction. I have written a lot. I have written some nonfiction, and in those occasions, I feel it's a lot about film. So I'll talk a lot about film and Native perspectives and story ownership from tribal people, things like that. I think that's where I find a lot of the politics side of it, and the writing will come through the film end of it. And if I write anything overtly political, it comes from there.
Thank you. English?
Again, probably not a lot to add. I guess these that I've read this evening are more kind of along the lines of what Ramona's describing, where, I mean, with that Utopatsli piece, that I guess the longer of those shorties, is, among other things, a way of engaging with, historic instances of not too far back, right, within a couple generations of detention and internment, right? Just a couple hours drive from where I live, the Topaz relocation camp or concentration camp, technically, more precisely, and the forms of detention and statelessness that we're perpetuating now. So I don't know. I guess it's a little further under the surface, but probably not too far. And that's always I guess that's something I try to navigate with each piece. Mhm.
Thank you for each of those, for those answers, addressing that. I don't know if we have other questions in the chat. Is there another one that we want to turn to? Or if not, I have another question but we can look at the chat first.
There's one more very specific question for Pam from Hampton Randall. Do you know if Hampton's with us still?
Yes, I am. Hey Pam, got to read Deep Creek for one of my classes this semester. In this section, you talked about just walking out of your PhD program because one of the professors wouldn't sign a piece of paper. And the way you wrote about that made it seem so nonchalant, and you weren't like walking away from 9/10 of a PhD like you said. But I'd really love to know more about your thought process that day. Was it really as easy as you made it seem?
It wasn't easy, but it was that fast, and again, I was trained early to walk away from abusive situations. I learned that early, and I learned it pretty well. And honestly, walking out of my PhD was really the first time I had done that outside of my family. I have now done it several times, but it was a huge deal. But the way I wrote it is true. I decided it in a second, that I was being treated, poorly. After Cowboys Are My Weakness came out, I was being treated like I had, set feminism back 50 years, if you can imagine that someone would think I was capable of such a thing. That I was glorifying an archaic form of masculinity. I had set feminism back 50 years with my little book of short stories about my stupid boyfriends. Like, the whole thing was just so over the top and insane. But so I wasn't thinking about leaving until that day. But I was recognizing that I was suddenly getting to hang out with these writers when I went out to do book stuff with cowboys. And Cowboys Are My Weakness, not cowboys, literally, with the collection, Cowboys Are My Weakness. And that all of those people were having really rich lives and a heck of a lot of fun compared to the academics at Utah, who seemed to be having no fun at all. So my young mind was aware of that. My young mind was like, wow, writers have more fun than academics. And I realized I'm talking to a room full of academics, and I myself am an academic. So I am doing that consciously. But, I'm doing that with the knowledge that I wound up in academia. Here I am. But it was really like, what do you want your life to be? What do you want your life to be? And Cowboys was doing well, but I didn't have 3 pages of another book to rub together, as I say in the book. And so it was a split-second decision. But once that voice in my head said, you don't ever have to come back in this building again. Like, once the voice said that, I knew that if I didn't listen to it, I would be letting myself down in a way that would keep haunting me forever. And it's exactly true. Like, I walked out, it worked out well for me. I got lucky. I'm a full professor with a BA, which just makes me laugh every day. And here at Davis, my colleagues, like at the meeting, like they'll be saying something shitty about somebody who doesn't have a PhD. And they'll be like, well, everybody has a PhD these days. And I'll just be like, hi, I'm just your resident BA here. And then they always go, well, you have something. They go, yeah, but you have something. I'm like, yeah, I got something. Anyway, that's sorry, that's really all about me, and that's not really what we're here for. But yes, it was a split-second decision, but it was not nonchalant. It was huge, and it became a way for me to walk out of other abusive situations throughout my life. And then I got an honorary, so I have like a Bill Clinton PhD.
Awesome, thank you. Danielle, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Any other questions from folks?
I have a question for Ramona. Can I ask Ramona a
Ask
question?
away.
I really don't want to end with me like ragging on academia. Ramona, tell us just a little bit about your book and when it comes out.
Well, my book is called Shudder, and it is about a Navajo woman who works as a forensic photographer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And through her story, we kind of begin to realize that she can see and talk with ghosts. So the book kind of goes back and forth between present day and her childhood. So we kind of get some backstory about how Navajos really feel about death and about how she grows up with this kind of power, knowing that that power is really completely taboo for her culture. So she grows up kind of shunned because of what she can do. And she grows up as a photographer. She loves to take photographs. So the story just kind of tells how she grows up and then how she deals with this issue that she has all the way into her adulthood. So the book is going to be released by Soho Press, I believe in mid-2022, from what I understand. And yay! And I'm so excited, and I just got my line edits back. So that's like, well, that's really stressful. But it's also, I have really good editors who make me laugh pretty consistently during my edit process. And, you know, like they've been calling me out like super hard about like, Ramona, that particular camera didn't come out until 2010 and you're talking about 2004. And we're like, oh my God, like the thing. And then there's like, well, technically if she started working in May and she's been on the job for 5 years, then you're about 6 months off. I mean, stuff like that. Oh my God.
Isn't it like beautiful that somebody reads you that close? Like whenever I get my line edits, like it makes me want to cry that someone's like, well, you've spelled gray with an E 16 times, but here you spell it with an A. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like one person in the world is reading me this closely. Like it's so beautiful. Really, it makes me weepy.
It does. I still cannot believe my editor has probably read this thing more than I have. And it just blows my mind. And I got that style book like a couple days ago, and oh my God, that is so cool. Like they just I mean, it's just mind blowing to me that somebody besides me paid attention to all that stuff and actually even paid more attention to it than I did. And like they have all the timelines broken down from like her birth all the way to like the end. It's just like, wow, this is insane. But I'm super happy that they really have. They've been my greatest cheerleaders, and even when I didn't believe in it, they did. And so I'm very happy that Juliet at Soho decided to be so interested in the book and just kind of stayed with me even when my agent wouldn't. So thank you, Soho Press. It's been a really wonderful experience, and thank you, Pam. Of course, Pam came to IAIA after I had graduated. But I have learned so much from Pam because I sit through all the craft lectures and I do all the readings. And it's just been an incredible learning experience. So thanks so much, Pam.
Well, I think that's a pretty great way to end. Let me add my thanks to Pam and to English and to Ramona and to everybody here and to Danielle, of course, for making us really welcome this evening. It was really great to hear everybody. I want to remind folks that our next reading is next month on November 22nd, the fourth Monday, where we'll have poets Karen An Hui Lee, Kevin Gooden, and Kimberly Berwick. That'll be added to the terrain.org website event soon. That'll be a registration also. I think that's about it. Danielle, anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to echo that again. Thank you so much to each of the right, to Ramona, to Pam, to English. And I love that we talked about advocacy and the politics, imagery, documenting images through photography, memory, glimmers, all of those things. So thank you for adding to more of our discussions in general, to writing and to advocacy and the politics during this very challenging time. And thank you, Terrain, for asking me to host this.
Well, thanks for hosting. And again, thanks everyone for coming out, and I hope to see you all next month.